Okay, so after a bit of a break, let's talk about my league games again. For those who don't know, there is a league organised on Board Game Arena of Unconditional Surrender main event games. And as of March 2021, I had won one game in the first round of that league, and I was currently playing 3 more games in the first and second round. And today we'll start with the long opening. I'm playing against Rondon. Fundamentally, in Unconditional Surrender, offensives are races. You need to achieve certain objectives in a certain amount of time. In this case, having just got out of the opening and into the mid-game, France has just fallen, and the main objective for the early part of the mid-game here is to achieve, or end of the opening, depending on how you think about it, is to achieve a complete medlock. That is to get control of all parts of North Africa and, importantly, Suez and Gibraltar. Functionally, I have 3 fronts. I'm advancing out of France into Spain with the objective of reaching Gibraltar. I'm fighting through French North Africa, where I am now opposed by British troops, and I am attempting to complete the seizure of British material around Suez, and particularly the port of Alexandria. German forces break through at Bilbao fairly easily, and I'm going to be able to take one more city. So it looks like the Portuguese unit can take Madrid and I can collapse the Spanish this turn. Unfortunately not. Portugal, like Ireland, is one of those nations that only has 1 unit, and because of the home defence rule, that unit has to stay within 3 hexes of Portugal. So it can go up to the northwest and take Coruna, but it can't take Madrid, which is 4 hexes away. But by September, I'm through the Spanish and I've captured the Suez Canal. My objectives are Gibraltar. My first tank has got there, but I'm not yet in a position to launch an assault. French North Africa is virtually an impossible fight. I'll come back to how on earth we're going to sort that out later. But rough ground against air-supported British units, we're not going to be making any progress there. And I need to finish off this little knot of defenders at Alexandria in order to consolidate my hold on the Suez region. With Suez lost, the UK has to run its supply out of Alexandria right the way across the Med out to the Atlantic. And these sorts of battles are fundamentally about supply. To hold this defence, Rondon will need to run 3 convoys. 1 for the WDF, 1 for the garrison unit, and 1 for the fighter. The escorting battleship currently has 3 sorties, and the convoy has 2. Rondon chooses to run the battleship first, which I think is a mistake. I've prepared 4 units in intercept positions. These will allow me to intercept multiple times as the UK unit runs the gauntlet. I have 3 units on 4 sorties, which will be enough to exhaust a fleet that's already got 3 sorties. That means that fleet will be non-functional at the end of its supply run. And units on 4 sorties weren't going to do me any good anyway. They're just going to get no effect, 1 point each results. But it means that the battleship will now no longer be able to escort the convoy. And that's why I suggested that it was a mistake to do it this way round. Had the fleet escorted the convoy, the fleet would have protected the convoy from all of those intercepts and given it a good chance of getting through at least once. Now I'm hoping that either the fighter, located in Spain, which only has 3 sorties, or the German surface action will be able to successfully intercept the convoy and turn it back so that no supply at all will get through to Alexandria, and that should break the resistance. Rondon makes the smart play, offers me the convoy at Algiers first, which is supplying troops in French North Africa. I refuse this. My German fighter at Valencia is one of only 2 units capable of actually turning a British convoy back, and I'm not going to waste it here where this wouldn't actually stop supply getting to the British units. But it's the right call from Rondon's point of view, because either it draws the hit, in which case the Alexandria convoy might get through, or it gets through unopposed, either of which is a win. I did stop the UK convoy, and it's tempting to buy replacements on my Luftwaffe units so that they can continue to intercept, but my highest priority is to repurchase the surprise marker. It's important to understand how much impact holding a surprise marker has on a fight in Africa. If Axis forces are threatening a Sea Lion, an invasion of the UK, the British cannot commit their full weight to holding on to Africa. It's not even a choice thing. When the UK collapses due to the Sea Lion invasion, every unit on the board takes a step loss and all naval and air units are removed. So any resistance in Africa just collapses outright anyway. Alexandria falls in October, and by January I have the British reduced to a single pocket in North Africa. This is not an unusual situation in unconditional surrender. The key to reducing a pocket is to knock out the supply, and that means air power. With a fort at one end and an armoured unit defending the other, nearly a dozen hexes of difficult terrain, you're not going to achieve this just by ramming head-on with panzers. Unfortunately, the problem is that the Allies currently control 5 ports. They're just coming out of the Hungary Gap, the period when the British have minimal production points, but if they can start running 4 or 5 escorted fleets, it's going to be quite impossible, even cycling German fighters, to exhaust them. I need something more dramatic. And the solution is that surprise attack marker that I purchased. I have poor weather, which means an amphibious invasion is possible using an Italian fleet, and the target will be Tangier. That will be a devastating blow. It will prevent other units using any convoy at Gibraltar. It will block direct movement through the Straits, so the ports inside the Mediterranean, Oran and Algiers, will be unusable, and it will force all the supply to come through Casablanca. Once the supply is down to that single point of failure, it will be relatively easy to suppress it with the Luftwaffe and finally dig the British out of Africa. And with any luck, the isolate bonus will allow me to take Gibraltar. And I immediately make a sloppy error. I forget to escort the convoy. There's no interdiction in the sea zone, so it's showing green on the map and the port is undefended, so I don't need a landing bonus. But there's an RAF fighter at Casablanca and they can intercept me in the landing hex. It's a low probability intercept and it fails, but I feel silly making the mistake. Swings and roundabouts, Rondon immediately makes an error and sends the displaced fleet to Casablanca. With Tangier taken, Casablanca is now the only operational port, and it's just been clogged up with a fleet that's got sorties on it that I can exhaust with fire from aircraft. So that would have been better to leave Casablanca empty, which would have guaranteed at least one turn of supply. So now my attention turns to Gibraltar, and here's the combat table. This is the rows that correspond to a British defence of Gibraltar, with the top 2 rows marked in orange, applying to garrisons, and the bottom 2 rows marked in green, applying to regular units. Now, it's a relatively tough task to take this. Against a garrison, if you get a +6, you have a 1 in 3 chance of taking the garrison out. Thus, if you can throw in 2 attacks at that level, that gives you a better than 50-50 shot at taking Gibraltar. Against a full strength unit, where you need 2 consecutive attacks to succeed for 2-step losses, those odds drop to just over 1%. So it's a general strategic principle, and we'll see this in a game later in the league. If Gibraltar comes under threat, the British should station a full strength unit there in order to prevent a medlock from occurring. Anyway, on to my East First game against Gamerdad. It's March 1941 and I'm preparing to launch the invasion of France. So, a general point I've made before, I have a strong preference for a mix of British and French units in the north to force the Luftwaffe to split their efforts during any attack. A little wrinkle to note. In a 41 defence of France, the first motorised upgrades to the armoured unit at the end of May. So you should think about where you position the first motorised. I don't think positioning it on the Italian border is a particularly good idea. I would be positioning it in reserve at Paris so it doesn't bear the initial brunt of the assault and therefore get blown up and deprive me of the armour unit, but it's in position to fight in the north where I expect the weight of the attack to come. A few thoughts on the Spanish border. I have Spain as an ally in this game, and I think that there are two ways you can respond to an Axis Spain as the Western player. The 3 marked hexes make infiltration impossible, so given the relative strength of the force involved, they have a chance of holding. I'm doubtful about that as a strategy because I think an Axis Spain pretty much dooms any French defence. However, in East First, it's worth remembering that France surviving into the bad weather is a disaster for the Axis, so you might want to go with this kind of defensive arrangement. The alternative strategy is to essentially accept a French defence is hopeless and plan a counter-offensive against Spain. So this constitutes what I might call the Franco line. What if Spain activates an Axis power? Not uncommon in an East First game because you usually spend the Soviet unlimited success on it. If the Allies want to make an offensive against Spain, that is practical. There's 2 towns immediately on the French border, so you've got a good chance of taking those. Tangier can usually be taken fairly easily because it can be isolated and it doesn't have full supply. It is, however, only worth 1 point of national will. And the British could spend their surprise marker to land somewhere like Corunna. All of that adds up to 7 national will, and the Spanish have 8. So if you can kill 1 Spanish unit in the process of doing it, that's enough to collapse Spain. And in general, this is a principle that applies to a lot of Allied defences in unconditional surrender. If you have a hopeless position, one of the questions that you can ask yourself is, can I take national will off one of the minor allies or potentially collapse a minor ally? Because if I succeed in doing that, I weaken the German endgame position, even if I fall a month or 2 faster in this particular defence. Finally, my historical defence against Sutokahu. As a quick reminder, at the end of the summer offensive in September, I created a breakthrough south of Moscow and retook Kursk, threatening to cut off and isolate the German line east of the Don. It was relatively successful, but there are dice rolls against which no strategy is effective. And fair weather meant that I lost the units that had made the breakthrough and the national will of those units. The 7th Infantry here, I managed to isolate in January and it hit twice, running about a 1 in 4 chance of destroying it, but this held as well. Like I say, there are dice rolls against which no strategy is effective. The Russian winter is not without its counterplay. I got a DD on a weak Yugoslav unit and broke through here, and then destroyed the Italian unit that's currently under attack and retook Stalingrad. But with the Russian winter coming to the end and the Soviets on 22 national will, this fight is basically over. The next turn of fair weather will likely finish them. And in May, Sutokahu gets a fair weather turn. I lose 15 Soviet units. I could have reduced that by adopting a redoubt strategy, and in hindsight I think that would have been a better choice, but the Soviet collapse probably was inevitable at this stage, and they do eventually go in another fair weather turn in June. So in effect, since in this game I tried an experiment and retreated in May, I'm functionally right down in the bottom 10% of weather distributions for the Soviets. I probably could have pushed the defence to July. Slightly better weather, I would probably have got to August or September. But ultimately, the failure of the counter in the previous September probably did doom me. Okay, a few general thoughts. After this game, I set up a few 1941 scenario games to try out different East Front positions. These are the months with fair weather chances marked. In a historical scenario where the Axis get 2 full years of offensive on the Eastern Front, they can in theory have as few as 6 fair weather turns or as many as 12. The chances of a successful defence depend on how many such turns the Soviets must face. But the Soviets have to make their choices without knowing what weather is coming. And there are essentially 3 defensive strategies. The one most beginners play is a frontal defence. This is historically what the Soviets did, which was to attempt to fight for ground, sacrifice units to keep ground. The second, which is the one I usually play, is the shadow box and counterpunch strategy. Essentially, you fall back ahead of the German advance, interfering with it reaching its full extent, but not being willing to engage in a stand-up fight until the end of September. Then you counterattack. You hope you don't get fair weather, and then it rolls on into the Russian winter with the German position stabilised, and you look to hopefully recapture ground and destroy German units in the process. The third is the redoubt strategy, where essentially you give up most of the Soviet Union relatively early, holding on only to the region up in the northeast, small pockets of difficult terrain in the south, and the fortresses, and you essentially preserve as much national will as you can. If you're planning to play the shadow box and counterpunch, you have to take gambles on what the weather will be. I think you have to gamble that there will be bad weather in October and November of 1941. Having now experimented, I'm reasonably sure you should gamble that there will be bad weather in May 1941 as well. So you have to gamble on those, and they put you at about a 1 in 4 chance of getting weather that will allow you to do what you need to do. Okay, enough for today. I might do a more in-depth episode on East Front strategies at some point, but I am going to catch up on my Diary of the League games.